Unlike so many other brands that feel the need to have 3 or 4 different lines of football boots, most of which I think we can agree all have at least one line that doesn't necessarily need to exist, New Balance only has 2 boots, both of which are very different and both of which actually offer something unique. You have the brand new, or the newest, Tekela V2 Pro, which is their control boot. And you have the New Balance Furon V5 Pro, which is their speed boot. Both of which have actually just seen a price drop being reduced from $220 to $210 at full retail, which is still not cheap. Definitely cheaper than most top-end models, and ultimately just something that we never see anymore. The question is, are they actually worth the $210 price tag over other more popular options out there? That's exactly what we're gonna be discussing in today's video. I'm gonna go over all the tech specs, I'll compare the 2 boots a little bit, and of course we'll also take a look at how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, watch the entire review. And if you're interested in either of these 2 boots for yourself, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen, or you can click the first link down below. That's going to take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll actually be able to pick these up below their normal $210 retail price. It's an elbow crack. As you'd expect, both boots come in boxes. However, with the Furons, they do include an extra set of insoles to go along with the ones already inside of the boots, these being the comfort option, as you can see by the branding there on the heel. It features this soft mesh liner on the surface that has this interesting kind of subtle silicone texturing to it that does grip your socks really nicely, and it's made from an ortholite foam. The extra insoles are very much appreciated, and honestly, I think should be the norm for football boots above $200. And they both include string bags that are supposed to be the same, but the one that came with the Tekela is a little bit more yellow than the one that came with the Furon, which is why this one gets a rating of 6 out of 10, and this one gets a rating of 66 out of 123. So as I've already mentioned, the Furon is a speed boot and the Tekela is a control boot, meaning that if you want to be as fast as possible, you want the Furon, and if you want to have the best touch possible, you want the Tekela. None of that information is true unless you're extremely gullible, but the boots as a whole legitimately do feel very different when you're wearing them. Focusing on the upper, the Furon is pretty much the last holdout in the speed boot category to still feature a classic synthetic upper. It's not mesh-based and it's not knitted, even though there is a slight mesh component, more of a very thin textile to this upper. It's a combination of their Phantom Fit frame as well as what they're calling Hydroskin, which is the top layer of polyurethane, giving the top layer material a very similar texture to other speed boots out there, but the end result is a material that ultimately doesn't have any extra padding to it. So in terms of giving you that raw barefoot touch on the ball, this does that better than just about anything out there right now. This is on par with something like the Mercurial Vapor 13 Elite in terms of the barefoot feel that it provides, if not even thinner than that. And that's something that I really like about this boot. I would compare it to something like the Teijin Synthetic found on the Mercurial Vapor 10, which was actually one of my personal favorite Mercurial Vapors. So I really like how this feels. It's not plasticky by any means, it's flexible. And then of course you do have that internal Phantom Fit structure that's very clearly visible. It does give a slight amount of texturing on the surface, but it's there as a reinforcement element to make sure that your foot is held down and locked in place. I would say the only downside of this upper comes down to the lacing system. It does have a one-piece construction, with the central portion being filled in with this very thin, kind of elasticated, almost neoprene type material, but you'll notice that the lacing system itself is very shallow. So you have plenty of lockdown through the heel and midfoot, but the forefoot is left pretty much free of any laces, which means that you get a really clean touch on the ball in this area of the foot, something that you wouldn't normally find with other speed boots, but it does mean that the lockdown in this area is not quite as good as it could have been if the laces just ran a little bit deeper. The Tekela, on the other hand, is quite a bit different, and my preference of the two, if I'm being honest, it's still what I would describe as a thin upper, but it definitely has a little bit of a padded component to it and definitely feels softer on feet in general. It's a base synthetic material that's reinforced by way of what they call kinetic stitching, which is very clearly stitching running throughout the entire upper. Kind of an obsolete technology seemingly on leather boots, but they have incorporated it into this synthetic upper, but it's not something that you feel internally because there is a liner underneath all of this to block out the feel of this stitching. All that stitching is there to do is to give a little bit of texture on the surface of the upper, which is exactly what you get. It has a slightly kind of grippy texture to it, but it also adds a lot of extra reinforcement to the upper itself, meaning that once you've tied the laces tight, the responsiveness is actually a lot better than you might expect. I would actually say that this is more responsive than the Furon, even though it's not technically the speed boot from the line. And a lot of that is also down to the new Tekela V2 lacing system that runs a lot deeper than what we saw on the original. It does have a one-piece construction with, again, kind of this neoprene type material, very thin, filling in the central portion of the boot, giving it this one-piece structure. And as a whole, the touch that you get is very, very good. If I had to compare it to anything out there, it's really difficult for me to say that it's really that similar, but it does kind of give me the vibes of what we used to get from the CTR 360 line from Nike. Moving to the rear of the Furon, you will find that it does have a standard low cut, which I think should be the standard for speed boots. And the boot as a whole, which you can clearly see just based on its overall design, was modeled after a Sprinter's spike, which does make a lot of sense for a speed boot type of application. It has an internal plastic heel counter, a little bit of a lip to the outsole that runs up the back of the boot. And then the internal heel liner is very, very raw, just a smooth synthetic leather, not a lot of extra padding, but the overall lockdown I find to actually be quite good. Where the Tekela is quite a bit different and also quite a bit wider. It still features an internal plastic heel counter. It's still low cut, but it does have a little bit of an extension piece along the edges. And you'll notice that the inside of all of the edges has this kind of sticky silicone type material, which I actually quite like. It's there as kind of a lockdown element to a certain extent. Whether or not it's actually helping with the lockdown remains to be seen, because this really doesn't have much tension to it at all, but I still think it's cool and it does feel quite good when you have the boots on. Internally, the liner is this very smooth synthetic material with a little bit of padding. I think that there should be maybe a little bit more padding in here, but given the overall shape that they've come up with here, the heel lockdown and general fit, also the comfort seems to be quite good. And again, this would be my preference, especially from a comfort standpoint in comparison to the Furon. Moving to the sole plate and stud pattern, you'll find something fairly aggressive looking on the Furon. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel quite as aggressive as it looks. The sole plate itself has some good rigidity to it, but also is nice and flexible through the forefoot. I wouldn't say that it's quite as responsive feeling as something like a Mercurial, but it's definitely not too far off. And as far as the FG stud pattern is concerned, it's very Mercurial-esque, I would say, in terms of its layout and the positioning of the studs. But it has these triangular shaped studs, which we've seen from a couple of different brands at this point. Kind of an interesting layout at the heel where you have two main studs and then these two kind of mini studs. Again, you would think that it's super, super aggressive, and it does provide really good traction, but the amount of bite, I think, suffers mainly down to the fact that the studs themselves aren't overly long. So for use on slightly harder ground, I think this is really, really good. But on normal firm ground, there are more aggressive options out there. As for the Tekela, it is visually very different from the Furon. The feel of the sole plate, I would say, is more flexible through the forefoot, but definitely a little bit firmer than what we had on the original Tekela. And I do really like how they've kind of put the support structure through the midfoot on a bit of an angle, because it just allows for slightly more natural flexibility when you're wearing the boots. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, this is pretty much as standard as it gets. Very similar to what we see across the entire Adidas brand. And the studs are actually a little bit longer on this boot than you'll find on the Furon as well. Traction is pretty much what you would expect from a stud pattern as standard as this one is. And then when it comes to weight, this is maybe where things don't make the most sense, because you would expect the Furon, being a speed boot, to be lighter than the Tekela, but in reality, that's not actually the case, which I'll show you right now. Both of these boots are in a size 9.5 US, so this is a fair comparison. We'll start with the Furon, throw it on the scale, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.8 ounces, the equivalent of 222 grams, which is light, but not quite as light as some of the competitors in the speed boot category that this is trying to beat out. Take that off the scale, again, 7.8 ounces. We'll throw on the Tekela, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 204 grams, which is roughly 0.6 ounces or just about 20 grams lighter than that of the Furon, which is really good, on par with pretty much most top-end boots out there, including some speed boots. So from a weight perspective, despite being labeled or branded as a control boot, the Tekela is actually lighter feeling than the Furon, which makes no sense. So as you can see, I've swapped out the stock dark gray laces that come on the Tekelas for some neon yellow reflective SR4U replacement laces that accent the neon yellow bits on the boots, and I think make them visually a little bit more interesting. SR4U laces are a great way to change up the style of your boots in a very inexpensive way, making them unique from everyone else. So if you're interested in some for yourself, the website to go to is www.sr4ulaces.com. There'll be a little pop-up on screen as well as a link down below in the description. So if you're interested in some for yourself, be sure to go ahead and check that out. On feet, the Tekela and the Furon definitely feel different from each other, but that's not to say that they don't have their similarities. The most similar aspect of these two boots is the number one thing that I hear people complain about when it comes to the modern boot industry, and that is why are football boots seemingly so narrow. That is the one thing that New Balance does not do with their boots. Not to say that these won't fit people with narrow feet, but they are significantly wider, I would say, than other brands out there, even though these aren't the wide fit variations. And trust me when I say the wide fit versions that are also available are extremely wide. Through the midfoot, these actually feel very similar in regards to overall width, but definitely the volume is a lot lower on the Furon, which means that they wrap your foot a lot more closely. The upper being as thin as it is really does give you that second skin kind of barefoot sensation, and they do feel a little bit tighter on your feet in general, where the Tekela is a little bit more open in terms of its volume. It still fits extremely well, but is also very, very flexible. Both, I would say, are quite comfortable out of the box with minimal break-in time required, although personally I do find the Tekelas to be a little bit more comfortable in general. Width-wise, I think these are going to be suitable for just about anybody, even if you do have wider feet. And again, you do have that wide foot option available if that's something that you do really want. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these both in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you're looking to order either of these for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So which one should you buy and why? Well, I think if you're on the market for a pair of speed boots, if ultimately you're after the lightest possible product with the most aggressive traction, I think there are better options out there. However, in terms of the barefoot feel on offer from everything on the market right now, this is actually one of the best, especially if you're into the older style synthetic speed boots rather than the knitted or mesh-based ones. Also, if you have slightly wider feet, this is definitely a wider speed boot than most of the other options out there, especially the wide fit variation, which is something you're not going to get from any other brand. As far as the Tekela is concerned, this is a boot that I can wholeheartedly recommend over just about anything if it's what you're looking for. It's comfortable, it's lightweight, I think it looks the part, it feels the part. It's a legitimately very good pair of football boots that for $210 actually costs less than most other top-end models out there. It's legitimately one of my personal favorites. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. Again, if you're interested in either of these two boots below their normal retail prices, there are links to the review pages down below in the description. If you have any questions regarding either of these boots, feel free to ask them down below in the comment section, and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. If you're new here and not subscribed already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.